We have in the studio today Aron McGuire, USA Bobsled and Skeleton Chief Executive Officer. Aron was a former member of the U.S. National Bobsled team competing on the World Cup circuit.
And thank you for being on the Home My Name is Dana podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, good. Thanks for having me, Dana. Good to be with you today.
Now, I know you're a former U.S. bobsled member. I know you competed on the World Cup circuit, I believe, between 2003 and 6.
Yep.
How did you get started in the sport? Tell me a little bit about your background. And I also did a little research. I know you have a track and field background also.
Yep. Yeah, good question. And you know, what's cool about, our bobsled and skeleton athletes is that every one of them has a unique story about how they got involved. And for a lot of them, it's they were introduced by watching Cool Runnings, and that inspired them. And so I know when I first went to Lake Placid, at the time, the Olympic Training Center, my background research was watching Cool Runnings like 3 or 4 times. And so, for me, I always loved watching track and field for the Summer Olympic Games. Mm-hmm. And then on the winter side, loved watching the sport of bobsled, just the speed, the excitement, the athleticism. And I had run track and field in college. Went to the University of Akron for my undergraduate. And I was a walk-on athlete, and pole vault hurdler, and the coach pulled me aside one day and said, Aron, I want to talk to you. I said, oh, what's this going to be about? And he goes, I noticed that you really work hard. You're really passionate. You're a good pole vaulter and hurdler, but I'll be honest with you, you're not really good enough in either one of those events to really be good. But we get this event that it's called a decathlon. It's 10 events. And the good news is you just have to be pretty good in all 10 events. And so, I thought, that sounds pretty cool. And so learning about the running, the jumping, the throwing, I got hooked on it. And so had a really good experience, eventually going into the decathlon and track and field. Ended up breaking the school record and really proud of my accomplishments there. But after track and field, I had kind of realized I'd gotten as far as I was going to get in the sport. I wasn't going to make an Olympic team, wasn't going to make it a national team, wasn't going to go to the World Championship, would have a decent collegiate career. And it just so happened I started thinking about bobsled. And I thought, how does one get involved in the sport of bobsled? And there's only 2 tracks in the United States, right? Park City and Lake Placid. And my guess is that there's probably not little kids running around those 2 cities, those little 2 towns, being bobsledders. And so I did some research, and I found that the sport recruits, there's a lot of talent transfer. And so the sport itself recruits a lot of big people that can run fast, that can push heavy objects. And I'm like, okay, I'm 6'3", I'm 200 plus pounds. I can push heavy things. I can run fast. And so it turns out that I had been training for the sport of bobsled for years in track and field without even knowing about it. And so reached out to the national governing body and asked about, how does someone get involved in the sport? And they said, yeah, we recruit a lot of track and field athletes, football players, rugby athletes, volleyball, softball. So, if you've got a skill set in one sport, there's a good chance you can come over and be successful in both bobsled and skeleton.
Right.
And so they invited me out to the Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid, now the Olympic and Paralympic Training Center. And they'd asked, some of my times, what's your 100 time, your long jump? And they said, yeah, we think you got some aptitude. And so went out to Lake Placid, and it was basically a rookie camp of introduction to bobsled. And I was surrounded by 30 plus athletes that had never touched a bobsled in their lives, and were learning about the sport. And during that week, we learned how to push a sled, how to jump in. Mm-hmm. We pushed a bobsled on wheels going down a hill. We did some classroom, here's how the sport works. And during that week, they had done some testing on us, almost like an NFL combine. And at the end of the week, they invited me and 2 other athletes to go train with the national team.
Oh, nice.
And so that was ultimately my first introduction with the sport. And at that point, I still hadn't gone down the track. Right. And so that winter, had a chance to go up to Calgary, Canada. Mm-hmm. And go down the track, and was just like, this is awesome. Right. I want to keep doing this.
Right.
So was totally hooked, and had the opportunity over the next several seasons to push with the national team, nice. On the national team, and compete in Italy, Germany, Switzerland, France, Austria, Canada, the United States, on the highest level of World Cup Tour plus World Championships, and just had an amazing experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, everything you said, my experience is very similar. A track coach of mine said, Dana, they're doing this recruitment tour because they were having like a recruitment tour out here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally from Jersey, but I live here in California. But anyway, and he said, well, you're crazy enough to do something like the skeleton. I'm like, I didn't even know what the skeleton was.
Yeah, right.
Right. I'm like, I knew the luge, but I never heard of the skeleton. And then I was like, oh, okay. And I did a little research, and I was like, oh yeah, I'd do something like that, and and did this almost the same thing with the the combine type thing and stuff. And I think my first experience was at the Calgary Ice House.
Yes.
Ice House there. And I didn't know you. I mean, like, you're telling me I got to get on this little thing, and how do you get on it first off?
Sure.
And it was like I looked like, I wish I had video of, my first start, because I was like looking like, a fish trying to get on that thing. And,
Well, I'll tell you, I can relate to that. And for those listening or watching at home that don't know what skeleton is, I mean, most people are used to bobsled, and they've got 3 events now in bobsled. They've got, the 2-man, 4-man, which are the traditional events, and then you have 2 women, and then just these past Olympic Games they added monobob, which is a one person for the women. And so on skeleton, it's going down the same track, but one person, and you're on your belly going head first down the track, and so both sports are going 70, 80, 90 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And I was actually just in Lake Placid, and I was sitting around the dining hall, the training center, and sitting with some skeleton athletes, and they said, hey, you want to try skeleton out? And I think it was just kind of a dare or what, but I said, yeah, sure, I want to try it. And they I really wanted to, but I think they thought they were calling my bluff. And so I got to the Ice House, which is this indoor push track that the state of New York has invested and built, and it's the only facility in the United States where athletes can literally push a bobsled or skeleton on ice 12 months a year. So it's a 100-yard long giant freezer where it replicates the start of a bobsled or skeleton track. And so I got out there, and I had khakis on, a button-up shirt, and one of the athletes said, hey, here's your helmet and spikes. And so I said, let's do it. Put the spikes on, put the helmet on, and they pushed me down. I was like, this is really cool. And so the second time I did it, I said, I'm gonna go ahead and jump, run and jump on myself. And I've seen it, 1,000 times, and I'm like, I can do this. Yeah. And so got going, pushing that sled, and you're running as fast as you can, and you're literally doing a dive onto the sled. And, I got going, and I went for the dive, and at the last second, I kind of chickened out, and I, balled up in a, cannonball position, landed on there, hard hit, but made it on. Got down, came back up, and didn't go to sports medicine. So that was a big win.
That's a good thing, right? Right. They didn't take you off on the sled to sports medicine, right?
Yeah. So I think they'll probably use that. I'm sure there are athletes videoing it, and I'm sure it's going to be used for rookie camps on what not to do.
What not to do, right?
Yeah. But it was really cool. And so this winter, what I want to do is go down the track, maybe not from the top, but part way down, and go down on a skeleton sled.
Yeah, it's brutal, Like I said, I don't want to hold on the conversation on this too long, but I know my first time, it was at Park City, and they started us at I don't know if it was a women's luge, but it was midway. It wasn't at the top of the track.
One of the lower starts. Yep.
Yeah, because I went through the school. And that first time down, I mean, the Ice House is a whole different ball game. When you get on that track, it's like, I went down that thing. I think I was going, every way, but the right way, sideways, backwards. It was, but it was awesome. I loved it. And I did broke for somebody on the bobsled. And now that's a story I'll tell you at the end, because I still got bruises and they're still healing on my.
Well, I'll tell you, there's 2 reactions when you do a bobsled ride or a skeleton ride for the first time. Some athletes will say, how can I get back to the top of the track as quick as possible? Yeah. And other athletes will say, how quickly can I get back to the airport to get the heck out of here?
And that was almost me.
You either love it or you hate it. And for us, we're looking for 2 things. One is you have to have the athletic aptitude to be a successful athlete, and you got to love it. Because, we've had some amazing athletes that come through and they're like, this isn't for me. And we've had some athletes that love it and and have developed and become great bobsled and skeleton athletes.
Yeah, no, it's a fun sport. It's a fun sport. And I'm going to talk more about the monobob too a little bit later. But I want to get into now. You're currently the chief executive officer of USA Bobsled and Skeleton. I think of course, I think is most exciting sports. Can you tell us, our listeners, a little insight on what you do? What is your overall?
Yeah, good question. So I've got my entire professional career has been in Olympic sport, Paralympic sport, one way or another. So after I competed in bobsled, I went and worked at USA Track and Field based in Indianapolis. So the national governing body that oversees track and field. And I was responsible for all the logistics of Team USA athletes going to World Championships, Olympic Games, Pan American Games. And so basically getting athletes from the United States to wherever they're going, provide them that positive environment experience so they can focus on training and competing. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for a period of time, and then moved to Colorado Springs to oversee the Olympic and Paralympic Training Center that's here in town. Same concept. How do you provide this positive, supportive environment for athletes to really just focus on what they want to do, and give them the resources to not be distracted by other things around them, but to be dedicated to being the best they can. And so was in that role for about six years. Mm-hmm. And then the position of CEO of USA Bobsled and Skeleton opened up. And this was about three years ago. I thought this would be a really cool opportunity. I obviously love the sport. And for me to be able to come full circle and get back involved was really appealing to me. Okay. So I day one, I was actually going to St. Moritz, Switzerland for the World Championships. Mm-hmm. And on day 7, the pandemic hit and everything was shutting down. Yeah. And so it's been an interesting time to make that transition. And so the whole first year was really focused on how do we navigate the COVID environment to not just shut the sport down, but how do we safely provide that environment for athletes to train, for us to identify new athletes and compete internationally. Yeah. And so that was year 1. And then year 2, COVID had kind of gone away, but was still there. And then you've got all the stresses of the Olympic Games. Yeah. And so, we've been fortunate to make some really positive steps forward in the last 2.5 years as an organization that we can look back on and say, we didn't just shut down business during the global pandemic, but we were able to continue forward, still identify opportunities for us to make improvements, and ultimately support and have a team be represented in Beijing and do really well. Yeah. And so that's been kind of the background to getting here. And the organization is really a pretty small organization. Yeah. And you think about it, the wide range of national governing bodies in the United States, where you have massive ones like USA Track and Field, USA Swimming, and we've got some small national governing bodies that are staffed and organized by 1 or 2 people. And so we're on the smaller side. We really have about 5 people that manage the day-to-day operations of the organization, the business side of things. Mm-hmm. And then we have about 10 or 11 coaches or performance staff. So coaches, high performance director, sports medicine, that are really responsible for everything from recruiting athletes to developing athletes to supporting our top athletes in the United States at World Cup, World Championships, and Olympic Games. And so being part of a small organization, I feel like I'm back being a decathlete again. Nice. Because I'm wearing so many different hats. I mean, there's no 2 days are the same, but there are ultimately my role and job is to take our strategic plan, and we have a 6-year strategic plan going from 2020 to 2026 that focuses on athlete support, funding, sport, raising awareness of the sport. Mm-hmm. And it breaks it down into each area of how much we want to increase revenue, where we want to get revenue sources in from, how we want to support athletes currently, how we want to recruit athletes, and how we want to continue to engage our alumni. And how can we help with that transition going from being a full-time athlete to life after being an athlete. Yeah. And so my, the big picture is how I'm judged is how are we comparing against that strategic plan. And so for me, it's working with, we've got a director of sponsorship and partnership who's out there on a day-to-day basis, reaching out to companies that may want to sponsor us.
Nice.
And, we're a non-for-profit organization, and most people see, a jersey or a shirt like you have that says USA, and they make the assumption that we're government supported, that we're supported based on tax dollars. Now, every single Olympic sport, every single Paralympic sport and team in every other country in the world is government funded.
Right.
The United States is the only Olympic and Paralympic committee that's not government funded. So we rely on three sources: funding from the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, we rely on sponsorship, and we rely on private donors. And so, we're always wanting to do more than we have the resources to support.
Yeah.
And so it's always the difficult decision of what are we not going to do this year versus what are we going to do. But then it's also, how do we play some offense and try and raise our revenue and bring on new partners that can provide either expertise and technology, that can provide some value in kind, or cash that ultimately helps support the organization and the athletes that are out representing the USA team.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have to wear a lot of hats, unfortunately, but I mean, it's a good thing, it's because you can stay connected to, whereas if it was a big governing body, you kind of feel like you're, reaching different areas.
Correct. You're delegating a lot. And it is nice to, I look at some of these organizations that have 60 or 80 people. I think, man, that would be cool to have. Yeah. But at the same time, I can look back and say, okay, I had a direct impact on these programs, these initiatives. Yeah. An athlete raised an initiative about how we can help support retiring athletes, and we've got now we've got a program that goes in place that recognizes their commitment, their investment in the sports. We connect them with our alumni. We connect them with resources that can help them with that transition. And so having that direct impact is certainly extremely rewarding.
Yeah. It's funny because I came across an article that you were interviewed in Lake Placid News, and you were asked, I'm going to kind of read it verbatim a little bit here, but you were asked why you wanted the job as U.S. Bobsled CEO. And I loved your answer because it's so true. You said, they said, once you slide and you're on the ice, it gets into your veins and it sticks with you. And you also said, and when I had a chance to put on a uniform that was red, white, and blue, had USA across the back of it, that was a special moment for me. You said, so at the point, once I was an athlete, I said, I'm going to dedicate my life to Team USA. And I find that so true. I've been off the ice for a few years, and, still to this day, there are times, when I wish I could slide again or be part of, that experience. I think, the ice is still in my veins also. At least it's in my clothing, because
it is. No, it is. You get invested in, and they're amazing sports and amazing people that are involved. And, we say, once a slider, always a slider. Yeah. And so we want people to stay involved. And, I'll certainly need to, after this, I've got your contact information, so you're going to start getting our alumni information.
Nice.
And
nice. So, appreciate it. Thank you.
We want to start including our alumni at events, and inviting them and engaging them to be part of the sport. Nice. And we realize that if it's not being done by us or one of the two tracks, it's not being done in the United States. Yeah. And so it's not like we have a junior feeder program out there where there's 100 clubs across the United States. We don't have NCAA bobsled or skeleton. Fortunately, we do have a lot of talent transfer that comes from other sports, but it's not a high school sport. It's not an NCAA sport. There's very few clubs. And so if we're not doing it, it's not being done. And so we know that it takes a village. And so really the more people that we can get involved to either be, full-time staff members, to be part-time coaches, to be volunteers at events, to support the organization and the efforts in some way, we know that's going to allow us to be more successful and more effective moving forward.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you, there's a question that or an answer you just said that I'm going to ask you a little bit later. But is there times that you still want to throw on a helmet and jump back on the sled? Because I know we talked just a little bit, about it, but put the spikes on and, get that helmet on and go down the track.
Yeah, it's funny. You go in phases. After you retire and you leave it, you have that feeling and you can do it. And then you get to a point where your brain says you can do it, and you get on the track and you take about 4 steps and you feel that hamstring pull, or you feel, you wake up the next morning and you're like, oh, and you're like, you still want to do it.
Right.
And then you get to a point where you're like, I don't think I can do it anymore.
Yeah.
But there are those moments you get out there and you're like, there's such an amazing feeling going down the track that's unlike anything else.
Explain it, yeah.
And I'll from my experience, there's something that's very exciting, and to be a successful or high level athlete, you got to be very selfish.
Yeah.
And it's all about waking up in the morning and saying, what can I do today to be a little bit better than where I was yesterday? What can I do today to take one step closer to achieving my goals, whatever those are? Make a national team, make an Olympic team, be an Olympic medalist. And everything you do is focused on you. And then at some point you make the transition. And my transition went from being an athlete to coaching, and I coach track and field. And I found that the amount of reward that you have by being a coach or giving back and helping facilitate others, it's off the charts. Yeah. And so to be able to wake up every day and there's still times I wake up and think, it'd be good to get back out there. But I think I kind of get back into reality of one, I'm not quite as fast or as fit as I was, but two, it's really rewarding to wake up every day and say, what can I do today to have a positive impact on the organization or a positive impact on the team or athletes themselves?
Yeah. It's funny because my days are when the temperature drops below 60 degrees. I'm thinking, I remember the days it was like 20 and I'm standing in like spandex on a mountain at 9 in the morning. And then I'm like, don't want to do that anymore right now.
Yeah. I'll tell you, there's a whole other element of the sports that people don't see. And you turn on the TV, you watch the athletes go down, but I talked about the you have to have the athletic talent. You gotta love the sport, but you've also gotta be committed to it.
Yes.
Because no pit crew, unlike NASCAR, that shows up, that pulls the sled out. The athletes themselves are the pit crew.
Yeah.
And they arrive, they travel overseas, the sleds are in crates. They go to the shipping portion of the airport. Yeah. They're physically unloading these 600-pound sleds, 800-pound sleds into trucks. They're driving to the next city. And to your point, sometimes it's minus 10, 20, minus 30 degrees. And there's so much behind the scenes that people don't get a chance to see that goes into it. And you've just got to have this grit. You can be an amazing, talented athlete that loves the sport, but unless you're willing to wake up, move heavy sleds, and stand out in the cold, you're not going to make it in this business.
Yeah, no, I'm tell you real briefly my experience on that, and it'll always be in my mind because the one time it happened. I was at work on a Thursday here in California, got off of work, went to LAX, had my sled in my car, parked my car, got my sled and me to the airport, flew to Park City because I had the next day had to do 2 runs in order to qualify for the race on Saturday.
Yep.
And within that time period, my body was all crazy. And it was like, like you just said, I mean, you lug your sled, which, I'm not lugging a bobsled, but it was a skeleton sled, which is still a little heavy. And just the commitment that you have to have, people don't realize all that goes into it. I want to ask you, so there are 3 tracks in North America. There's Park City, Lake Placid, and Whistler. Whistler in Canada. When you were sliding, what was your favorite track? And how do those tracks compare to the European tracks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I never had a chance to compete on Whistler. So I competed before Whistler was built. And for a period of time, you mentioned Calgary. I mentioned Calgary. Calgary was a track that was a long track or an old track that had been there for a number of years. Unfortunately, is not there anymore. And you can imagine the cost of operating tracks is very expensive. And so I love Calgary because it was my first track that I went down, and there was something about it that there were some great curves. You were gliding through there. It was a fast track, and it was just a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. What's nice about the 2 tracks that we have in the United States, Lake Placid and Park City, is that they're very different.
Yes.
And so Lake Placid is a very technical track, a lot of turns, and it's a great, there's a lot of tracks around the world, around Europe, North America, that have curves and portions of their track that are very similar to Lake Placid.
Mm-hmm.
And Park City is a very different track. It's a gliding track. There's the turns aren't as technical. It's a faster track. And so if we have, we're fortunate to have 2 tracks in the United States, 3 in North America. Some countries don't have any tracks at all. On the flip side, you got Germany that has like 4 tracks. And so we're fortunate to have 2 tracks that are very different, both amazing partners of ours.
Mm-hmm.
And if athletes learn how to get down those tracks, then that sets them up for success over in Europe.
Yeah. Real quick story on a few years back when I was actually braking for somebody for bobsled, and the Jamaican bobsled team happened to be on the track. At the time, of course, Jamaica doesn't have a bobsled track.
Yeah, sure.
This funny story. So this is at Park City, and I'm in the when after you finish sliding, you go in the little room to wait for your truck to come down and pick you up. And the Jamaican team, they were practicing and they kept flipping, right? And the one guy, he's sitting there, and I felt so bad because all you would hear is just the sled, right. And it's like loud. And he goes, "My heart is a bleeding, man." He's sitting in there, and I'm thinking, well, if your heart's bleeding in this track, if you go to Lake Placid,
yeah,
you're gonna have a whole different experience.
It's a technical track, but again, it's great because a lot of our athletes, rookies, learn there, and if they're learning on a technical track, that means they're going to be better prepared for the other tracks that aren't as technical. So if we had a couple of simple tracks in the United States, that would be great, but it wouldn't necessarily set the team up for success, set our pilots or athletes up for success. And so knowing that there are challenges at each of the tracks, that's a good thing.
That's perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk about the upcoming season. And correct me, please, if I'm wrong, because I'm not too in tune. I've kind of did my research a little bit before. I'm a little out of the loop, but so I believe your first event in Lake Placid is the World Push Championships at the Mount Van Hoevenberg complex.
Yeah. So we're actually very fortunate this year. So the last 2 years, because of COVID, the entire seasons were in Europe, and so we didn't get a chance to race on home ice, which is always that's always a boost of confidence. I didn't get a chance to race in front of home fans, in front of mom, dad, grandma, sister, brother, and friends. And so we're fortunate this year to start off in North America. Yes. And so the first race will be in Whistler. Second race will be in Park City.
Okay.
So World Cup will be in Park City, and then there's a week where we talked about this indoor ice track.
Right.
And so there's a week between Park City, the World Cup in Park City, and Lake Placid, where the U.S. will host the World Push Championships. Mm-hmm. And so that's it's almost like drag racing of bobsled. And so it's all about the start. And so all the countries will be here. And so we'll get a chance to see who the best of the best is at the start.
Yeah.
And then the week after that, we'll be in Lake Placid for the World Cup.
Okay.
We'll go into a mid-season break, and then the second half of the season will be in Europe with World Championships in St. Moritz, Switzerland.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to ask you, because I know with the pandemic and everything, and before that, I think most of the American team would go over to Europe first and then come back and do, it looks like, kind of flip. But this year it's kind of like the opposite, I guess.
It is, and it changes. It depends a lot on where the World Championships are. So in 2025, the year before the 26 games, the World Championships will be hosted in Lake Placid.
Okay.
World Championships, and so a little bit of background on World Cup and World Championships. Every season we have 8 races, 8 World Cup races, and then it ends with either a World Championships or Olympic Games. And so in 2025, we'll end the season in Lake Placid. And so in that year, the first half of the season will be in Europe, and then we'll finish off in North America. So it all kind of changes based on where Olympic Games are or where World Championships is located.
I was going to ask, so what type of preparation, do the athletes have in getting ready for these World Cup races? I know this season's about to start and everybody's excited. Where are you at as far as that?
Yeah, so great question. There's always, how does one make a national team? And
Right.
so there are a series of steps to get there, but it does start off, at least on the bobsled side, for U.S. Push Championships. And so what we'll do is we'll host our U.S. Push Championships in Lake Placid on ice, and this is where athletes get tested on their single push. How fast can they push a lighter bobsled by themselves? Then how fast can they push in combinations?
Okay.
And then from there is a national U.S. national team trials where they're actually going down the track, bobsled and skeleton on the full track. And so on the bobsled side, the pilots get a chance to see how the push athletes do in their push championships, and they're starting to form their teams.
Right.
And so for our bobsled pilots and skeleton athletes, their ability to make the national team is largely based on their results at national team trials.
Okay.
Once those athletes have been identified, then we have a selection committee that looks at the results of the push athletes on the bobsled side, results from the single push, the combination push, and the results at national team trials. And the selection committee then puts the national teams together.
Okay.
And so what they'll do is they'll start getting on ice in October, taking trips. The pilots will start getting reps. The teams themselves will start gelling and working well together, and then we'll select that team in early November, and then we'll run right into the World Cup tour,
Okay.
and then we have a more development tour, 2 tours. One's the North American Cup tour, which is North American races. It's kind of like the minor leagues, and then we have a Europa Cup or European Cup series, which is in Europe. And so we do have a bit of depth where we're not only having sliding taking place at kind of a grassroots or development level at sliding schools and training camps, but then we have the North American Cup and Europa Cup, and then at the top of the top is the World Cup, and then ultimately ending in this year World Championships.
So now I'm going to say we're in September now. So things are starting to kind of rev up, I guess, as far as the athletes getting to either now that was a question I should have asked a little earlier, but where are is it Colorado Springs or Lake Placid? Where are the training? I know a lot of that there's no tracks in Colorado Springs, but the training center is there, but also the training center in Lake Placid, I think that's more geared to the bobsled skeleton athletes. So are they in both facilities, or how does that work?
I'd say a lot of them are all over the place.
Okay.
And so typically at the end of the season, the athletes take a month or 2 off it's a long season. Again, you're standing outside in cold weather, you're moving heavy sleds, you're pushing your body as far as it can go. And so you really do need that recovery time. And so after the season, athletes take a couple months off just to rest and recover.
Right.
Then they start getting back into the season, and this typically takes place in the spring and early summer, where they're working on speed, power, explosion, Olympic lifts, sprints to get physically ready for the season. And then I would say late summer, around July, August time, a lot of athletes who have been around the country in their hometowns, in Colorado Springs, in California, because you can do that sprint training, you can do that recovery anywhere.
Right.
So starting in July and August, we start to see athletes starting to come to Lake Placid, and especially with this new ice house, it's a huge competitive advantage for us to be able to get on ice in late summer, early fall, to start getting those reps and really improving that start. Because for both bobsled and skeleton, it really comes down to 3 components. One is the start. There's no engines, and so we're relying on gravity and athletes pushing sleds.
Yeah.
And so the higher velocity and the faster you can get start, that's gonna impact your downtime.
Yes.
Start your pilot or your ability to drive down the track. There's definitely faster lines to get down that track. And then the last is equipment, and how fast and how good of equipment do you have?
Right.
And so knowing that we can go to Lake Placid and get on ice early season, that's great for our athletes. And so that is now becoming a place that athletes really want to be at. They recognize the value of being there. And so we're starting to have a core group of athletes that are based out of Lake Placid or spending more time there.
Getting to a question or something you said earlier, and I wanted to talk about, the sport of bobsled and skeleton, the technology is evolving like every year. There's on equipment. And I think it was the 22 Olympic Games in Beijing that the monobob was introduced.
Yep.
I feel like that was totally exciting. I think if that would have been introduced when I would have denied, I'm not the biggest, person here, like I said, I'm strong. Well, I was strong, but tell me about the monobob. I mean, for those who are not familiar with it, can you tell us how it got started? Is it something that's, going to be incorporated from here on out, or was it just like just a one-time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And partly because we had some great success in Beijing and monobob.
Yeah.
But historically, we've had two man and 4-man for the men.
Right.
And in 2002, when we hosted the games in Salt Lake City and Park City, women's 2-woman was introduced.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the first time that women got involved in the sport.
Yeah.
And so there was a drive by a lot of our athletes and women athletes across the United States for equality, and saying, hey, we want two disciplines.
Right.
And how come the men have 2 and we only have 1? And so there was a push for there to be 4 women
mm-hmm.
along with 2 women to have that consistency. And from what I understand, I wasn't involved in the discussions, but what I understand is there weren't necessarily enough women in enough countries to field a full, enough 4-woman sleds.
Right.
So they introduced this concept called monobob, which gave women 2 disciplines along with the men 2 disciplines. And what's really cool about it is all the sleds are standard for 2 women, 2-man, and 4-man. There's sled design that's really important, and you have countries have to make a significant investment on designing their own sleds to be competitive.
Right.
And so there is a large component of the overall result that relates on the equipment. On the women's monobob, all the sleds were exactly the same, standardized sleds. And you can change the setup and change the runners or the blades on the sleds.
Right. Yeah.
But for the most part, they were all pretty standard. So it came down to the athlete.
Right.
And so now we have athlete versus athlete, which is really exciting because it's what, ultimately that's what the Olympic Games and competition should come down to, not necessarily who can design the best sled or who's got the biggest bank account in order to invest in that sled. But it comes down to athletic ability and athlete versus athlete. And so this was a really cool addition to the bobsled lineup, and it was introduced a few years before the Olympic Games.
Mm-hmm.
Came out in 2022, and it is going to be moving forward. And so we'll continue to use the same sleds through 2026, and it's not going anywhere that I know of. And so it is a great sport that it's great for emerging or smaller countries that want to get involved, because it is a fixed price within the equipment.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have to have a whole bunch of athletes. And so we're seeing some smaller countries that it never snows, places that it never snows, like, let's get a team and field a team. And so, you think about Australia. Australia's put together a women's bobsled program, and they've had some great success in women's monobob. Yeah. And so this is the way that the sport can incorporate more countries and provide more opportunities to athletes around the world.
Now, I know the next Winter Games are in a few years. It's in Milan and Cortina, I think, host cities.
Yeah, Cortina, Milan. So the 2 cities will be hosting the games together.
Is there a track built there yet? How far in advance, do the sliders get a chance before once the track is built, but how far in advance of the Olympics just to test, and see what they have to deal with?
Yeah, so we've seen plans. There used to be a track in Cortina, really cool track, and it kind of outlived its time, and so it's not an active track. And so there are plans to rebuild that track and keep a bit of the tradition. And so about half the track will follow the same lines as the previous track, but then the other half will be new elements.
Okay. And
so the track will be built a year prior. Okay. And there's an opportunity for every athlete to go to the track the year before and take it's 40 runs and everybody has equal opportunity,
Okay.
other than the host country, to get the same number of runs. And so being the host country gives you a huge advantage because you can take as many runs on that track as you want.
Yeah.
And so for every other country, it's a kind of a level playing field, because on new tracks, nobody really has an advantage other than that home country. And so we'll be going to Cortina the year before, getting on that track and learning as much as we can. They call it an international training period, where all the countries are invited to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll take our coaching staff, all of our athletes, and be learning as much as we can in those 40 runs.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wasn't sure on, like, I know, I think when Whistler was built, I know, since we were here, we were basically North America, you can run up there if you want to. I didn't know, especially being in Europe, what that was. Now, this is, a question for someone who's listening to this podcast and they're saying, hey, I'd like to be a bobsled skeleton athlete. How would they start? What would their first, do they? Yeah,
that's a great question. Hopefully there are a bunch of athletes that are sitting at home, or coaches that are sitting at home listening to this and saying, hey, I know an athlete, or hey, that sounds like it's pretty cool. And I always say that we've got an Olympic gold medal bobsled team or skeleton team that's sitting at home on their couch or playing a different sport, that doesn't even know that the sports are accessible. And I think the same thing that I did. I grew up in Ohio, and I thought, how could a kid out of Ohio make a national team in the sport of bobsled? And so, again, we're not necessarily looking for athletes that have ever tried the sport. We're looking for athletes that just athletes, that are either high school seniors that are graduating, college seniors that are graduating, that really want to stay involved in sport in one way. Mm. And so during the pandemic, it was difficult for us to host tryouts, or what we used to do, and we still are going to do that a little bit more, but basically combines around the country. And that's how you got introduced, is went to a combine, you heard about it, try out the sport, and we as the organization looked in, and then invited you or others to a camp. So during the pandemic, we couldn't do that. And so we had to think creatively and be imaginative and kind of say, how could we reimagine recruiting? And so we were fortunate to partner with a company called GMTM that was launching an online platform to try out for, at that time, it was really focused on football. And they expanded to basketball and baseball and some other core sports. And so we shifted, and we had athletes submit videos to us. One, why do you want to be a bobsled or skeleton athlete?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Two, show us you sprinting. Could be in your backyard, could be at a track, could be at a football field, just so our coaches can see whether you have good sprint mechanics. Mm-hmm. 3, show us a standing long jump. Again, we can see a lot from, how an athlete, stands, jumps, raise themselves. Are they explosive? Do they show power? And then 4, send us a highlights video. And so we had, some highlights that you'd expect: track meet, football game, basketball game. But we had some pretty unique ones where athletes were jumping over their couch in their living room, were pushing cars, were showing other skills. And so we still have that online tryout, that online, that digital combine, that digital tryout that we encourage every athlete to go to first and foremost. And so the athletes, if they go to our website, usabs.com, which is, stands for USA Bobsled Skeleton, they can go on there and they can create a profile and submit their 4 videos: introduction, sprint, jump, and highlight. Okay. And then our coaches are looking through there and reviewing those videos. And from those videos, we're then inviting them up to Lake Placid. And so, I would definitely encourage athletes, if they are interested in the sport, think it's a cool sport, want to continue to be an athlete, go to our website and upload your videos, create a profile, and we'll review it and get back to you.
There's so many questions that I want to ask you, kind of winding down here, but and I had to think about this. I said, am I going to ask Aron this or not? Okay, not many sliders are past their 30s before, slide past their 30s before they retire. Have you ever thought maybe a senior circuit? throwing it out there, for those of 30 and above, because
Yep.
kind of like the PGA, Champions Tour. There's a lot of us oldies out there that might want to compete. I'm not saying I'm one of them.
You're not signing up there, but you could.
I'm still trying to get the ice smell out of my clothes after years of that stuff, whatever is out there.
Well, I'll tell you, we have talked about it, and this is a way that we'd love to get alumni involved and other folks involved, and so we have thought about it in two ways. One is just to try it out and to be involved and to stay involved in both tracks, Lake Placid and Park City. So this is something that if you're interested in the sport, maybe not ready to try out for the national team, but just want to try it. Both tracks have passenger rides.
Yeah.
That you can take in the wintertime to try it out, or in the summertime, they're bobsleds on wheels that go down the same track as our Olympic athletes do.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're just going to try it out, you have that opportunity. We've talked about having a kind of a senior race or a alumni race at some point. We might want to, again, make sure we have plenty of sports medicine there at the time there, and our providers and some
your
ice
health
bags
card,
and Band-Aids. and the last thing that we talked about is creating a donor experience, because again, going back to we're not government funded, so we're relying on our sponsors, USOPC, and individual donors, and so putting together a program that individuals can make a donation to the organization and go through a week-long or a weekend experience of, a fantasy camp, so to speak, of trying out either bobsled or skeleton or both.
Yeah, no.
So I love the idea, and I say coming soon. That might be the next interview we have.
All right, I'll go tell my sled that in the garage. I'll dust it off, take the little hose runners off that I used to slap on there and everything. Aron, I want to thank you for being on the Hello, My Name is Dana podcast. I definitely want to have you back, talk about some more bobsled and skeleton and the season and the exciting things that are happening. I'm looking forward myself to coming both to the training center in Lake Placid and also Colorado Springs. So I really appreciate you being on today. Thank you.
Well, good. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation. It's certainly a pleasure, and it's always an honor to talk about the two sports here. So thank you, and go USA.
Yeah, right. All the way.
Well, that's it for this edition of Hello, My Name is Dana podcast. Please contact us at dlcarter7575@gmail.com and listen to more exciting interviews on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or visit us at hellomynameisdana.com. You can also catch the full video interview on my YouTube channel, Hello, My Name is Dana.